Hello, Kathleen Henderson here from Roots and Boots. I'm excited to share with you today some ways that you can get set up to have your best growing season ever. Hey everybody. So I thought before I jump into, I actually have 8 ways to share with you, 8 specific ways that you can get set up for success this year. But before I jump into all of that, I want to share a little bit about myself so you know who you're listening to. I don't know about you, but it seems like there are, experts popping up everywhere. Sometimes it makes me chuckle. Someone's been gardening for 2 years and all of a sudden they're an expert. So I like to know about someone's background before I listen to them. So I thought I would give you just kind of a quick overview of my gardening resume, if you will, and tell you how I've gotten to the point I am now where I'm growing over 70% of my family's food. So I started gardening 18 years ago, and actually before that, I grew up gardening on my parents had a little hobby farm, and they let me experiment with perennials and landscaping around their property. I've always loved gardening, but that's how I started out. We did not grow any food, no plants for food during that time with my parents growing up. But when I got married in 2003, we had this tiny little yard. We were in Texas. 2003 Texas, I think it was zone 9. I'm a little rusty on that. But we had this little yard, and I somehow convinced my husband to jackhammer and remove this concrete pad. There was a concrete pad in our backyard. I'm sure previous residents had some sort of hot tub, but we jackhammered it, got it out of there, and turned that space into a little vegetable garden. That was my first vegetable garden. I didn't grow a whole lot in those first few years, but I did learn a lot, and I kind of was cutting my teeth on gardening and learning about, I grew some tomatoes, and they had different needs from, I grew some carrots and some herbs, and so that's how I got my start. We were in Texas for 6 years, and then we moved to Virginia. We moved to a 3-acre property that was our first homestead here in Northern Virginia, Garden Zone 7A. And we were on that property for about 9 years. And so we immediately created a garden, and we gardened there for 9 years, and the garden got a little bigger as we went. And of course I learned a lot. I learned more every year. And that is when I really started focusing more on and making a goal of growing food, like actually growing significant food, translating my love for gardening into food on the table for my family. So after that 3-acre property, we moved here to our 20-acre farm 4 years ago. We're headed into our 5th growing season here on the farm. And we have every year expanded our garden here as well. If you've been following for any length of time, you've probably watched that process happen. I have a raised bed kitchen garden. I'm actually looking at it right now. It's directly behind our house, right out our back door. I have 12 wooden raised beds there. They are 2 by 10 each. That's the bulk of my kitchen garden right here. And then I also have another across the walkway on the other side of our door. There's another kind of quadrant area of our kitchen garden that is mostly in ground. I won't talk too much about that space. That's kind of a weird in progress space. But then, so I have the raised bed kitchen garden right here, and then way out behind our big barn, I have a large in-ground vegetable garden, and I thought I would tell you the progression of that. Our first 2 years here on the farm, it started out at 25 by 50 feet. In year 3, it grew to 50 by 75 feet. In year 4, last year, we added a 20 by 30 area, which is 4 hugelculture beds. And this year, actually, this space has already been added. A new space that is 40 by 70. That space I don't have high hopes for this year because we need some time to work on the soil. I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to plant there this year, and then I think we might be finished. I think I'm gonna challenge myself to grow everything we need to grow in that space, including that new space that we've added this year. So I calculated this out. not counting my raised bed kitchen garden, just that big in-ground garden out behind the barn, is 7,350 square feet. So I feel like I ought to be able to grow everything we need in that space. We also grow fruit. We have a young orchard. We planted fruit trees right away when we moved here, so those are all several years into, you know, fruit takes a long time to get to maturity. Vegetables are annuals. You know, you plant them in the spring, you harvest them, then they're done, and then you plant them again the next year. Fruit takes a lot longer to get to maturity, whether it's fruit trees or berries. We have all kinds of different berries: elderberries, raspberries, blackberries, blueberries, gummy berries, honey berries, aronia berries, probably other berries that I'm not thinking of right now, kiwi vines. So that is kind of another section of our garden. So I do raised beds, I do in-ground gardening, I do hugelkultur beds, we do fruit guilds in our orchard. It's a permaculture orchard, and we practice no-till gardening. Now, I hope that's not overwhelming. I wanted to pause and say I did not start out doing all of these things. And if you're a new gardener, I want to encourage you to start small, just like I did in that tiny little veggie garden back in Texas as a newlywed. Start small and kind of cut your teeth and experience some success before you expand. You know, if you come in and try to do a big garden all at once as a new gardener, I just think that's a recipe for discouragement. So, okay, so that's kind of my background, my gardening background. Along the way, I've landed on what I do feel are the best ways to garden organically without using chemicals. I'm hesitant to use even like organically accepted sprays or powders. My goal is to practice excellent soil health together with biodiversity of what I'm planting, and permaculture practices in order to achieve optimal plant health without needing to resort to things like sprays and powders. Also, did I mention this? I'm in zone 7A. I think I did mention that. We're in a weird little pocket of Northern Virginia, close to Maryland, close to West Virginia, and close to Washington, D.C. Well, I'll get into zones more in a minute. So anyway, that's my background. Today, I do want to share 8 tips for 8 ways to make this your best growing season ever. One important note, there will not be time to dive very deeply into each topic that I mentioned. I've already mentioned a few topics like permaculture and hugelkultur and fruit guilds and no-till gardening. So I don't have time to get into the specifics of each of those today. So I did want to let you know that I am going to send out a list of links. A lot of this I have shared on my blog or in YouTube videos, and so if you're interested in diving a little deeper into any of these topics, just make sure that you're signed up for my weekly newsletter. And this week on Tuesday, every Tuesday it comes out, I'll make sure to include a list of links to all the things that I'm mentioning today. And you can sign up for the newsletter if you're not already signed up at rootsandboots.com/blog news. Blog news is all one word. Okay. Also, before I jump into the 8 ways to make this your best growing season, I want you to share, if you will, share what are your growing goals for this year for food growing, for food preserving, for food making, like farm to table style cooking or baking. Share your goals, if you will, in a comment. I would love to know. The other thing I wanted to do before we get into the 8 ways, sorry, I've got my notes here so that I can stay on track and not ramble off on a tangent. The other thing I wanted to address before we get into the 8 ways to make this your best growing season is to answer a few questions that I've received about my brand new seasonal club. So the first question is, if I join as a basic member, can I upgrade to VIP later? The answer is yes, absolutely. Second question, what if I live in a subdivision with a tiny yard? Is the seasonal club still for me? And the answer to that is also yes. The seasonal club is all about helping you meet your goals, whatever your growing goals are, your food preserving goals, your food making goals, and enjoying foods in season. And a lot of that you can do without even having a garden at all. So even if you have no garden, there will be plenty of non-gardening topics to keep you busy. Like I mentioned, canning and preserving, farm-to-table cooking, and also natural living products like making non-toxic candles, making non-toxic skincare, things like that. I'll also be highlighting every month my recommended, my favorite seasonal books, both for kids and grown-ups, to help you kind of focus on the seasons and live seasonally with your kids and also in your own reading and learning. And then the third question I wanted to answer is, what if I'm in zone 8, a warmer zone than me? That is a great question. And the answer is that there will be plenty of overlap between what's happening in warmer zones like 8 and 9 and my zone, zone 7. And of course, all of the other topics that I already mentioned, like food preserving. Oh, I see lots of people waving, and I see some goals. Sorry, I'm not great about keeping up with the comments. Hello, thank you for joining us. And I see one goal shared, expand the garden and can more this year. Yes, I am all about those goals. Those have been my goals also. So I was gonna say, if you're in a colder zone than me, which would be 6, 5, 4, I don't know, is there a zone 3 in the United States, or is that Canada? I'm not sure. I'd have to look at the map, but those cooler zones would be following right behind me, which would be ideal also. And then the fourth question, which no one has actually asked me, but I know you're thinking it, and I wanted to address it, is that why should I join the seasonal club when I can just follow along with you here on Instagram? And here is why I'm so excited about the club, is that when you join the club, you're essentially locking in my mentorship and my attention. I get to focus and help you meet your growing goals. On Instagram, you do get to follow along with me and see what I'm doing in my garden and in my kitchen, preserving and all of that. But it's all about me and my goals and what I'm doing. Where in the club, I get to help you meet your goals for your family and for your situation. So I get so many questions here on Instagram about growing and canning, especially as we get farther along into the season and I'm showing all of these things that I'm doing, and I just can't answer them all as helpfully as I would like to. But in the club, we have a private Facebook group where you can ask your questions and your questions won't get lost, and I can spend more time answering your questions and helping you brainstorm. We'll also have a live Q&A every month. It'll be kind of like a coaching call in the Facebook group where you can bring your current questions and issues, and again, I can help you brainstorm and figure out some solutions. And then what's more, VIP members even get my direct text number. You can send me your questions and get a response in 24 hours. So that's why I'm so excited about the club, is it will allow me to really focus in on helping you meet your goals as opposed to you just following along on whatever random things I happen to be working on here on Instagram. Okay, so now that we've covered all that, let's jump into 8 ways to make this your best growing season yet. And I feel like I'm talking a little bit fast, but I do want to be respectful of your time. This is a Saturday. I know we've got stuff going on here on the farm. So I also want to get through these important tips for you. These are things that have made a big difference for me, and if you can work these things into the way that you garden and the way that you start your growing season every year, you're going to be more successful over time. So number 1, I've already mentioned this a little bit, alluded to it, is to know your zone. Hopefully you already know your zone. In fact, if you're watching right now live, go ahead and drop your zone in a comment. What garden zone are you? Again, I'm 7A here in Northern Virginia. If you don't know your zone, ways to find it are you can Google it, you can look it up on a map online. A really great way is to ask somebody you know in your area who gardens. If you have a local gardening friend, if you have a good local nursery, plant nursery, you can ask them there. You can ask your local Master Gardeners organization, your local extension office. Oh, I'm seeing the zone. 7A, woohoo! Another 7A, 6A, 4B. Awesome. I'm glad that y'all know what zones you are, because that's the first step to knowing like when to plant and what you can grow. So second thing is decide what to grow, especially if you're a new gardener, but also if you've been gardening for a while. I don't know if you caught my reel recently where I announced that I am crossing cauliflower off my list this year, because what I wanted to share is that everything you grow should meet 2 criteria. someone in your family, preferably most of your family, will eat it. That's the first criteria. And then the second thing is that it grows well in your area. So my examples are cauliflower. It does grow here, but I am the only person in my family who likes it, and it's kind of tricky to grow. So I am just cutting it off. I crossed it off my list for this year. So I give you permission to do that. But also another example is, like, my family likes avocados and bananas, but obviously they do not grow well here in zone 7A, so we do not grow those. We focus on things that do grow well here and that most of my family will eat. I've grown some other vegetables over the year where they were easy to grow or fun to grow, but I never really figured out anything, you know, appealing to my family to make with those vegetables, and so I just crossed those off the list too. So decide, you know, make your list. What do I want to grow that grows well here and that my family will eat? And then the third step is to decide, are you going to start those plants from seed, or are you going to start them from seedlings? Are you going to purchase little baby plants at your local nursery, or are you going to order seeds and start them that way? A couple of things to consider. I would definitely say for new gardeners, unless you're really ambitious, or unless you have access to somebody who has experience with this, or unless you join the seasonal club, I would caution you against starting seeds indoors. I feel like that's a little bit more advanced, and again, I just feel like you'll be setting yourself up for greater success if you start with baby plants, because someone has already done the work of starting the seeds and you just get to put the plant into the ground. That's mostly how I started out, and I recommend that. Of course, you can try your hand at seed starting. I didn't try that until I was like over a decade into gardening. But you are welcome, you know, just consider, do you want to start from seed or do you want to start with plants? One big advantage, obviously now I start almost all of my plants from seed. One big advantage to starting from seed is that you have much more control over the varieties. You have many more options. You can choose exactly what you want to grow and just start it from seeds, whereas if you purchase the plants, you are limited to whatever that nursery happens to sell. But I will say, also, do not buy your plants at like Home Depot or Lowe's or Walmart or any of those big box stores, or even some of the big chain nurseries or garden shops. If you can, try to find a local, organic, small nursery, and if you can find that kind of a nursery to purchase from, they are going to know, they're going to be growing varieties that do well in your area. They're going to be more knowledgeable, you know, better able to answer your questions. So those are some tips on deciding whether you're going to start from seed or start with purchased baby plants. The fourth thing that I recommend for having your best growing season ever is a planting date calculator. So I have two examples to show you. One is this one that I actually included in that giveaway on my main feed right now. It's called Clyde's Garden Planner, and it slides, if I can get my fingernail in the right place here, there we go. It slides like this. It has a side for spring and for fall, and that red line that you see, you line it up with your last average frost date. And actually that's kind of like a sub point of this number 4 with the planting date calculator, is that you need to know your average last frost date. And again, if you know what zone you are, you can use your zone to help figure that out. And all of the same tips that I shared for finding out what zone you are also hold true for your last, oh, someone else loves their Clyde's Garden Planner, yay. Yeah, I picked this up at the Homesteaders of America conference. I got to meet the actual people like who make Clyde's Garden Planner. He doesn't really have, he's not even on social media. He's this longtime gardener who made this. I think you can, I'm actually not sure how you can get it online, but maybe you can Google it, Clyde's Garden Planner. But anyway, you need to know your average last frost rate. And again, you can find that out by asking a local gardening friend, local master gardeners, if you find a good local organic nursery, extension office, all of those places are good places to ask, because that's very important to know. You need to know your average last frost date, because all of your planting plans are going to hinge on that frost date. So you can use something like this, or I also really love the online planting calculators. This is from Johnny's Seeds. I printed this out, And there are some other ones that I like too. Again, I'll include those links in my newsletter. I should be mentioning this more often throughout our live. I'm going to be sending out a bunch of links to dive deeper into some of these topics that I don't have time to get into today. So if you want that list of links to learn more about anything that I'm talking about today, make sure you're signed up for my weekly newsletter. You can do that at rootsandboots.com/blog news. Blog news is all one word. Or if you're already on my newsletter list, just check this week's newsletter for all of these links. So a planting calculator online, you plug in your average last frost date, and then like this one I was able to print out. It tells me the recommended dates for when to plant each of these. I mean, they just have kind of a generic list of many different kinds of vegetables, and they tell you according to your average last frost date, this is when you should aim to plant. You just want to make sure you understand whether they're talking about seed starting or planting transplants. So, but there are some online calculators that give you all of that information. And then my, oh, I'm sorry, I had more things to share about this topic of the planting calculator. Where is my paper? This is what I wanted to show you from my own garden binder, is that make a list. So once you have listed out everything that you want to grow, and you have figured out when your average last frost date is, and you've plugged it into a planting calculator, then either, you know, if you can print out like this, or on your list that you've made of things to grow, you can jot down each date, the recommended planting dates for each of your plants that you want to grow. And then this is my goal, is to make a list like this. I take all of that information and I put it, this is just a simple pencil written list on a piece of notebook paper, but chronologically by date, I write all of the planting dates on this side, and then here are the things that I'm growing. And then I made myself a column for direct seeding and for transplanting. So there are some plants that only get direct seeded outside. They don't do well starting in little soil blocks or soil cells. They do best starting outside in the ground. So those are my direct seed column. And then this column is for transplanting, for when the little plants actually go into the ground. So this master list has been such a game changer for me. I've got everything I want to grow listed here. I've got it listed in chronological order by planting date. And then I have a way to note whether I'm starting those plants, those seeds indoors, whether I'm direct seeding them outside, and then when to plant the transplants in the ground. My list is actually 2 pages long. This is the first part of that list. But that, again, has been a big game changer for me. So, you know, compile all of that information, make yourself a simple list, and that'll be your plan to work from through most of the spring, you know, as you're starting all of your seeds or purchasing your plants. You'll know when to do what. Okay, number 5, the 5th thing you can do to get set up for your most successful growing season ever is to focus on soil health. So primarily what I'm talking about here is plan to add lots of organic material to your soil. And I just want to camp out here for a minute and say, especially if you're new and maybe you're like, oh yeah, good soil, blah blah. Soil health is so important. This is something I have learned for sure in my 18 years of gardening, is that the more you can do to build your soil, the fewer problems you're gonna have in the long run. I'm here on our farm. Like I said, we're going into our 5th growing season, and I'm excited because now, at least in my original in-ground garden space, that soil, I've been working on it for 4 years, and this will be its 5th year, and it should be doing great by now. Now, some of the other areas in my in-ground garden were added later, and so I haven't had as long to work on the soil health there, but it's a constantly evolving process, and every year and throughout the growing season, I'm adding organic material. I also do other things to help my heavy clay soil in my in-ground garden. Again, if you want my list of links and resources, I do have more specific tips on how to grow successfully in heavy clay soil on my blog. Just make sure you're signed up for my newsletter, rootsandboots.com/blog news, all one word, blog news, and look for that list of links in this week's newsletter. So, soil health, what do you add? what organic material do you add? The best thing to add is compost. So find out where can you access good quality compost. If you find a good local organic nursery in your area, they should have a good high quality bagged compost that you can buy. It does get pricey. Do you have access to composted animal manure? Can you get composted cow manure or horse manure? I'm so thankful. This hasn't always been the case for us, but since we moved to the farm and have made some connections, we now use 100% in our gardens composted horse manure, because we have a horse farm. We live in like horse country. We do not have horses here on our farm, but we live near horse farms, and we now have a relationship with one of them where we just take our trailer over there and she loads us up with free composted horse manure. It's a bonus for her because she gets rid of her horse manure, and it's a bonus for us because we use it in our gardens. So just make sure if you're using animal manure that it is fully composted. Make sure you talk with whoever you're getting the horse or the cow manure from, and make sure that it has aged. I forget the exact lengths of aging for each manure, but you want it to look like dirt. Like we say, oh, we need to put some horse manure, in this garden box, but it's not actually horse manure anymore. It's dirt. It's composted horse manure, and it looks like rich brown dirt. That's what you want. We also recommend no-till. We practice no-till gardening, which means, again, I don't have time to get into all the many details of this, but basically, instead of tilling up the ground every spring in preparation for planting, which disturbs the activity of all those thousands and millions of little microbes and microorganisms all doing their thing down in the soil, we don't want to disturb that. So instead, we're just layering things on top. We do disturb the soil in a very specific, controlled way. More details about that in my blog post about tips for gardening in heavy clay soil. But in general, we're just layering things on top, and over time that is building the health of the soil. A third consideration, again, is if you have heavy clay soil like I do, I have tips for you. Rest assured that you can garden successfully. You can successfully grow food in heavy clay soil. I'm here in Northern Virginia with heavy red clay soil, and it does take some time and it does take some specific strategies, but you can do it. And again, those tips will be in my newsletter this week. Okay, the sixth way to get yourself set up for your most successful growing year yet is mulch materials. Again, what do you have access to? Make a plan. What are you going to use? Do you have access to a lot of leaves? Sometimes I'm a little bit jealous of friends who live in neighborhoods where they have certain times of year where they're setting out all these bags of leaves. Their whole neighborhood has these just bags of leaves out on the curb. If you live in a neighborhood, figure out a way to get all those leaves to your house. Talk with your neighbors, ask them if you can have their leaves. We have actually done that a couple of times, but it hasn't been practical for us on an ongoing basis. But by all means, if you're in a neighborhood, figure out how to use your neighbor's leaves. They are like gold for your garden soil. You can also use grass clippings. You can mulch with straw. You can use wood chips. We primarily use wood chips here on the farm because we have free and easy access to loads of wood chips. We have someone who comes and drops them off on our farm for free. They're thankful to have a place to dump them. We're thankful to use them in our gardens. With wood chips, you just want to make sure that you let the chips age for at least 3 months before you put them in the garden. So always have your supply going. You're pulling the aged chips from the one end of the pile, the finished end of the pile, and then the new chips are coming in on the other end of the pile and going through their decomposition, their 3-month aging period. Even longer is better. The longer they break down, the better, but at least 3 months. Otherwise, they will rob nitrogen from your plants and it will be bad. Do not put fresh wood chips on your garden. Okay, the seventh thing you can do to get set up for your best growing season ever is to keep notes and sketches. So I was going to show you my garden binder here. It's just a 3-ring binder. I just write on notebook paper. I do tend to write with a pen in my garden binder, whereas when I sketch, I'll show you my sketches in a minute. I like to do my sketches in pencil, but the more that you can include in your notes, the better. So this is something that I have learned the hard way. I used to not keep notes at all. In fact, I only really got serious about this back in 2019, which is when my garden notes start here. This is from 2021, from last year, but I just keep them all together here chronologically. And some things to consider including in your garden notes are dates. Dates for everything. Dates for planting, for transplanting, for harvesting. I recommend writing down your sources, whether you're buying seeds or purchasing seedlings. You know, just make a little note. Write the date that you bought it. If you're buying plants, write the date that you bought it, where you got it, you know, what variety it is. For seeds, I like to write down who I bought the seeds from, like Baker Creek, Seed Savers, True Market, etc. And I like to write down the date. Seed packets always have a date. Usually it says like packed for 2021 or something like that. So I want to know what year were these seeds. I also like to write down the amount of everything that I planted, like how many trays of each type of seed did I start, or how many little seedlings did I buy from the nursery, you know, how many tomato seedlings did I plant, how many tomato plants did I grow. And that is a very useful piece of information. That's been so helpful to me as I've gotten really serious about growing substantial amounts of food for my family, is to know how many pounds of potatoes did I plant last year. Okay, was that a good amount? Then I'll just do the same this year, or do I want to increase that amount? So always write down the amount of what you're growing and what you're planting. Also, you might want to record germination notes if you start your own seeds. You know, which seeds germinated well, how long did they take to germinate. And so again, I just am listing everything by date. Like, here's the date and here's what happened. You know, my onion sprouts appeared. My, first baby celery seedlings appeared. So that will help you. The more information you can write down, the better equipped you'll be next year and the next year to know exactly when to plant things, like how long do they take to germinate, when did you put them in the ground last year. If you planted your tomatoes on this date, like, did that work well, or do you need to plant them earlier, or do you need to wait? Was it not quite warm enough? You know, write any of those things down. Like I said, I've learned this the hard way. I used to be very willy-nilly, which probably surprises some people who know me in real life, because I'm a very type A, like, planner personality. But I also don't really like to get bogged down in all the details. Like, I'm an activator and a, like, go big or go home. Like, let's just do it. Let's do it. Let's not get bogged down in the details. And so I was like, oh, just plant my stuff. But again, as I got more serious about growing, substantial amounts of food for my family, I realized that I needed to be better equipped with information, and I needed to learn from year to year. And it's really hard. It's just like, I don't know if you ever do this, but it's just like when you stick stuff in the freezer without labeling it. You're like, oh, no, I'll remember what that is. But then later, a couple months later, you're like, I have no idea what's in this jar or what's in this bag. So just like I've trained myself to always label things before putting them in the freezer, because I am not gonna know what those are later. My future self will be thankful. Same thing with keeping garden records. You are not gonna remember, I promise you, next year, how many pounds of potatoes you planted, how many tomato seedlings you started, how many seed trays of onions you started. You will not remember. I'll just tell you that right now. So write it down. If you write it down, it will always be there and you can always access it. Yes, I have sometimes had to go back through my order history and my email and try to dig out how many pounds of potatoes did I order. My point is just that the more you write down in your garden notes, the better, the more successful you'll be, because you'll be better educated, better equipped each successive year to know how much to plant, when to plant, which varieties, etc., etc. The next part of record keeping is my sketchbook. I simply sketch out with a pencil my garden spaces. So I have my raised beds, I have a sketch of the in-ground garden, and of course these have evolved over time. I started out with 9 boxes our first year on the farm, and it's grown to 12 in my kitchen garden and has expanded across the way into a few more smaller boxes and an in-ground area, and then my large in-ground garden. I really only look at this in the spring when I'm getting ready to plant, because I like to rotate my crops at least 3 years, making sure that I don't plant anything where it's been planted the year before that, and if possible, even the year before that. So by penciling in where everything was last year, then in the spring, it helps me decide where to put each type of crop. So I pencil it in at the beginning of the season, and then as the season continues and progresses, things change a little bit and things get moved around, or I can fit more in than I thought, whatever, then I'll make adjustments. That's why I like to use a pencil. So then at some point during the growing season, maybe once or twice, I will sit down, usually towards the end of the growing season, I will sit down and make sure that my sketch accurately reflects where things actually were in my garden, as opposed to my tentative plan from spring. Does that make sense? So I pencil it in spring, and then as everything grows and goes into the ground, then I make adjustments so that by the end of the growing season, it's an accurate, true sketch of what actually happened in my garden. And then I have that going into my next season, like I said, then it helps me plan where to put things next year and the year after that, etc. Okay, so those are my 7 big tips for having your most successful growing year ever. My 8th tip is to join the Seasonal Club. This Seasonal Club is designed to help you meet your growing goals. Maybe you don't want to grow 70% of your family's food like we do, but maybe you want to grow a certain kind of food. Maybe you want to grow more of a certain kind of food. You know, maybe you want to try something new in your garden. Maybe you have preserving goals. You want to preserve more produce. Maybe you want to preserve produce that you get from the farmer's market or the grocery store even. Whatever your goals are, the Seasonal Club is designed to allow me to help you meet those goals, whatever your goals are. So you can find more information about the Seasonal Club at rootsandboots.com/seasonal-club. And 3 quick reminders: to enter my giveaway on my main feed on Instagram, to sign up for my weekly newsletter like I mentioned, so you can get all the resources and links that I've mentioned today to dive deeper into any of these topics. You can sign up for the newsletter at rootsandboots.com/blog-news. Blog news is all one word. And thirdly, again, I hope you'll consider joining us in the Seasonal Club so that we can make the most of each season's bounty together and cheer each other on as we do so. Thanks for joining me, and happy growing.